My name's Adam Spring, and this is a Remotely Interested podcast, hosted at remotely-interested.com. My guest for this episode is Kim Justice. Kim has a YouTube channel with around about 19,000 subscribers at the time that this podcast is going out. She deals with a lot of retro computing and retro gaming. It would be easy to simply get lost in the nostalgia of something like that, but if you go to Kim's channel, which links below on the SoundCloud, you'll notice that it's anything but that. And also I talk about it a little bit in an article that I've included below in the links as well. I think for Kim, it contains strong elements of cultural memory, and as we discussed, there's also a strong element there of when you're generating content, there's a temptation to go with the zeitgeist of the time or to go with trends. But if you want to generate content that has long-term value, it has to be something that you're excited about, that you have interest in. And I think with Kim, whatever the subject matter is, and in this case, if you go to a channel, you'll see that it is retro computing, it is retro gaming, there's always going to be a passion to it, and there's also going to be a social and historical context to it as well. And for me, that's the thing that really excites me about what she's doing. Now, we also talk about other things as well, like crowdfunding sites like Patreon, and we also talk about other people within the YouTube retroverse, I guess I could call it, people like the Angry Video Game Nerd. Again, you don't know who that is in the links, as well as if you're going to go into doing YouTube from someone who's now kind of seasoned in doing it, what are the tips that they can give you in order to generate content that is good? And a lot of that is basically perseverance. But anyway, that's enough from me for now. I'm going to leave you with Kim, and in the meantime, there's a Remotely Interested Facebook page, there's a Remotely Interested Twitter page, there's a link to all of my social media down the SoundCloud page. Yeah, in the meantime, if you could, visit them, click them, support them, rate, subscribe, review, it's all good. But for now, I will leave you with Kim.
How did I get into it? Well, I was on a uni course. I was doing a TV film production, and I just finished my first year, and I kind of thought, well, we had quite a long summer break back then, so I wanted to keep practicing the stuff that I was learning. And so I thought I'd kind of dabbled with stuff in the past, and I used to do bass videos and stuff like that, just fiddling around on YouTube, really terrible quality. I think there's still a couple of those up. And I just thought, I'll just try and experiment with making a game review channel. So I did my first review, which was Space Harrier 2 and Super Thunderblade for the Mega Drive. It took ages for me to actually finally get it out, but yeah, it got a fairly okay response, and then it just kind of gradually went from there. I just found myself just doing reviews more and more, and just kind of fell into it gradually more and more over the years until it kind of became what I do, essentially. I don't know, some people just seem to like them, I guess.
I think the thing that I found interesting as well, and for anybody listening, do go to the channel, is you explain your inspirations as well for what you do, and I guess your journalistic influences, for want of a better term. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, because seeing your stuff, and obviously, I grew up in Britain, 90s was sort of my main teenage years. I grew up with the heyday, I guess, of computer/video game journalism. So I understand where you're coming from in one respect very, very well. But maybe sort of other people who, whether it's American audience or things like that, they may not necessarily understand it.
Okay, well, back in the day when I was a kid, magazines that I used to like reading, in particular was Amiga Power, which I kind of enjoyed. So there are a couple of people now on that general house style that they had kind of irreverent, very honest. You could always tell that this is actually kind of what they thought about the game. They weren't trying to hide it in any way. Not saying that everyone was kind of brought up or anything, but sometimes people were just too nice, whereas they weren't. So there was that, and it was quite funny as well. It wasn't just, there's more to it than just purely writing about games. I always approach stuff with trying to put games in a place. I don't like to just cover games just as is, just without putting it into like a world, building a world around it almost in my videos. But anyway, there was them. Later on, probably one of the main things that inspired me to get into like internet video as opposed to just plain regular old journalism was two guys, Robert Florence and Ryan McLeod, who did a show called Consolvania. And they did this show, they started it in about 2004, and it was an internet show because they did it because they were pissed off because at the time there was a complete lack of gaming television anywhere, like not even on satellite, and certainly they hadn't been on the main channels, the terrestrial channels, or I guess you could equate those to network channels if you're American. There was nothing like that on anywhere, no games television. And so they made this show, this really like kind of cheap show. They had to rent all the equipment out there. Mike was a coat hanger, or it was just attached to a coat hanger. But the passion that they had for games and stuff, for finding kind of obscure gems for the PS2, such was out at the time, really shone through. And that kind of inspired me a lot when I eventually made my own decision to get into gaming videos, probably as well as other people. You got tip your hat to the nerd, angry video game nerd as well, just because even though his style isn't necessarily what I do, I mean, I always kind of like to be positive with my reviews. He is kind of one of those guys who does it to a very high standard.
I think you do as well. And, it's interesting your self-perception about sort of your role as maybe a journalist or not, as a commentator, I don't know, because the thing I really like about your stuff is you tend to fuse both the social and the historical aspects related to whatever you cover as well. I've noticed that's a theme that tends to come out, and I really do appreciate that, and that's one of the things that I'm always attracted to in your videos, is the fact that you give a wider context.
I never try to see myself as a journalist really, or a commentator. And I guess, I mean, so some of the work that I've been doing recently as well with retro game also obviously certainly fits that description. I've always kind of approached my videos, I don't know, in a weird way, I guess. I always still try and see myself as the fan almost, but just adding loads of shit. So almost like, I don't know, when I write videos, it's almost like a story almost some of the time. I always tend to do things for dramatic effect, whereas I guess if I was being more of a journalist, it'd be just more objective, just flat out, oh, here are the facts, this is this is that. I don't know, whereas I always have to kind of have a dramatic flair from somewhere.
One thing I'd really like to know, particularly the Peter Molyneux episode, is where do you even begin with something like that? Because it was just epic. I mean, it was awesome, but like, how do you storyboard something like that? Because it was just amazing, really, really good.
Peter Molyneux doing that series, that took a long time. I'd wanted to do something on Peter for ages because, I mean, he was he was one of the first people who I knew, oh, this is a guy who does games, and I love his games. I loved Theme Park and Populous and all that kind of stuff. And, he was always very visible in media, had been since the 1990s. So I'd always wanted to do him, and especially as kind of the shit hit the fan, so to speak, on Goddess rather. It kind of became more and more, I really want to do something with him. So I kind of tried, but I've always got to have a hook. There's always got to be something that finally hooks me into really wanting to do a video, whether it's Molyneux or Imagine Software or Psygnosis that I'm planning now. And I think the hook for Molyneux was Eurogamer released an article not too long ago about the full story of Lionhead, because I knew a lot about the Bullfrog years and had been immersing in what was happening currently. I didn't have much for the years in the middle. A lot of the Lionhead stuff I kind of played as I was doing the videos, just trying to get all my information on those. And like the whole story, like things like Milo and Kate and just what that project was actually going to be was really interesting. That kind of finally gave me the hook to really do Peter Molyneux, and it took a good couple of months. I mean, as far as storyboarding it goes, I mean, the way I just tend to do videos, I don't really storyboard anything. It's kind of, I have a way of working now, especially after doing this for so long, that I probably wouldn't recommend to anyone. And that I write what I'm going to say, I say it out loud just straight away, just spend like however long recording that, and then I kind of edit it all on the fly. So it's kind of like there's no meticulous planning in my work. It's kind of like I'm just going through my script and then thinking, oh, this is a good moment to try and get some clip of Molyneux saying whatever. So obviously I had to watch a lot of Peter Molyneux interviews, read a lot of shit and so forth, and then just kind of was spat out into the editor over the course of quite a long period doing. I mean, it was originally, and the original plan for Peter Molyneux was for it to be it was going to be a long video. I knew that. I was thinking it would probably be an hour long to get through everything. And then of course it turned into 4 parts. That was eventually about nearly 4 hours long for each of them. It just grew and grew and grew.
So just in general of like working with things like YouTube and stuff like that, because obviously you've got a massive following now in a way, like 18,000, is it 18,000 subscribers you've got now, or how many have you got?
Yeah, it's just over 18,000 now. So we're getting nearer and nearer to the big 20k.
What has been your key sort of takeaways or your key sort of observations of, working with YouTube over the period of time that you have, but also growing up, a fan base, I guess, based around this kind of decentralized notion of media, so like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, these social sort of channels and stuff like that. Yeah, what have been your takeaways and stuff?
As in things that have changed and so forth over those years?
Well, things that have changed, but also, I guess, how do I put it? What you've noticed in terms of how you've interacted with the audience and how your audience has grown and things like that.
Interacting with the audience, yeah, it's become quite interesting over time because, I mean, obviously when you kind of start out, it's so easy for you because you might only get a comment, 2 comments a day. I mean, that's probably my case for the first year or so I was doing stuff, even though some of my videos had got some good notices. I was still like only like 1, 2, maybe a little more comments a day. So I can happily interact with all of them. As you get bigger, your fan interaction does dissipate a little kind of naturally. I mean, I always still make an effort to read every comment I get, but I respond less and less just because they're coming in from all sides. And of course, they're not all necessarily positive ones either. So that kind of changes a little. I mean, and I still feel, I feel more that if I ask ask fans specifically, oh, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? I'll certainly get responses, whereas I probably wouldn't have before. But when it comes to fans like asking me direct questions, that can be a little harder. In terms of actual YouTube itself and how things have changed there, I mean, when I got into reviewing games in 2012, reviewing was, and probably still isn't in a way, not necessarily the in thing to do. I mean, 2012, it was all about Let's Plays and things like that. It was just all Let's Plays, you know, scare cammy stuff, PewDiePie, everything else like that. That was kind of the big thing. And reviews were sort of on the outs. I mean, guys who did reviews were kind of seen as a little antiquated almost. Or it's just like, oh, they're all just ripping off The Nerd or JonTron or whoever, like the couple of reviewers who are seen as quite popular still. I think as time goes on, that has changed a little bit. I think certainly with the advent of Patreon, more than anything, there's been more of a market for guys who, they certainly don't have as big an audience as someone like, say, JonTron, but they have their own sort of niche that they found, and they can do like kind of extensive reviews or video essays almost that allow them to kind of operate more on YouTube, kind of, or better on YouTube than they would have, say, in the days when I started.
How have you actually found Patreon? So for anybody listening who doesn't know what Patreon is, it's kind of like the subscription equivalent of Kickstarter. How have you found that as sort of helped or evolved what you do?
It gives you a lot more freedom. I mean, when you're just, I mean, because I mean, kind of part of, I mean, especially when, I mean, as I can say, I mean, when you do get to a point, and a lot of people who do YouTube don't get this point, when you get to the point where you actually make a little bit of money, I mean, only just a teeny little bit, you know, you do kind of, there's that thought, oh, well, I'd like to make some more. But when you're just relying on ad revenue, it's very hard because you're kind of almost beholden if you then decide, right, I want to make money on YouTube to do the kind of more mainstream stuff. Whereas kind of Patreon, you can have that smaller base and they're interested in the more perhaps less mainstream stuff that you have to say. I mean, I always say about my channel is just never going to be a mainstream sort of deal where I just don't cover the stuff that I enjoy covering, whether it's, you know, the Amiga and the Spectrum or old companies that haven't existed for about 20 years and stuff like that I tend to do on a regular basis. I mean, that sort of stuff is never going to be kind of a mainstream video. It's never going to get 1 million views, but it will get views from the people who love it and who support me. And it means that I don't have to think about, you know, if I want to go into YouTube full time, which I do and am planning to do, you know, thanks to the likes of Patreon, that's allowing me to do that. So I can devote even more time to these videos and they get better and better, ideally anyway.
You kind of pulled out two interesting things there, and I guess one respect in terms of content and what people see as interesting, and I guess as a content generator, what pressures could actually be in place for you potentially. So I think the other thing as well, and one of the main reasons that, you know, I really wanted to interview you was because I really like the fact that you follow what you want to follow creatively, because it comes across in your work so passionately.
I was kind of thinking, as much as I love sort of great games, so to speak, I have an example in a new video coming up. I find it very hard to talk about something like, I don't know, even something like big on Sega, like Gunstar Heroes, let's use that for an example. I find it hard to talk about something like that because, in a way, because it's great, that's kind of abundantly clear by how the game is, and a lot of people have already said that it's great. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I really enjoy covering more is kind of the more mundane, the more sort of games that no one gave a shit about then, and they would never give a shit about, but it was something that, I don't know, maybe you just used to play. It was never something that you thought was great or even good, but those are the things that kind of hit the more nostalgic memories for me, if you get what I mean. Whether it's like old sports games or something like that, kind of the landfill stuff of the retro world is a lot of the time the stuff that I'm most interested in, rather than a big RPG. Because I mean, if you want to be kind of mainstream in the retro game world, that's the sort of thing you have to cover. You need to cover the great titles. You need to tend to go to the, you know, what Nintendo did and all the RPGs and so forth, pretty much all of which are fantastic, but they're never stuff that really, I mean, if I did that, there's a chance I could get more views, but I wouldn't be able to do decent videos. I just don't have that sort of feeling towards them. That's probably another reason why I mean, I love Sonic, but that's probably a reason why I've never really looked at him so much.
And do you think, you know, the popularity that started to go around the retro gaming scene, for example, do you think that feeds into the amount of, you know, YouTube channels there are and social media feeds, and I guess non-traditional media, and how that's potentially helped stir that interest up or that cultural memory again? Do you think it's linked?
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, the kind of rule for retro is often that it's normally 20 years go by and then it becomes really in. So we're so into that now that retro is such a big thing. Retro gaming is such a huge thing. And I think YouTube as well have kind of gradually realised like the influence they have, especially when it comes to things over prices of games on eBay. You know, suddenly someone pimps this hidden gem, as the in phrase is now for them, and suddenly their price doubles on eBay. Or I mean, to go outside of the YouTube retro gamers, look at what happened when Kanye West said how much he loved the TurboGrafx 16. I mean, that was expensive before. It's monstrous now.
Yeah, so it's kind of feeding into other people's brands in a way as well. Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. And bringing up the second thread that I mentioned earlier as well is, in terms of the YouTube subscription, obviously I don't want numbers, but how many numbers do you have to start hitting to kind of get something revenue-wise from ads where you're kind of like, that's not too bad. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of, this might go somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to estimate that. I mean, for the sort of stuff that I did, I mean, when did I start kind of, I mean, obviously money's not something we're generally allowed to talk about, but probably like around like the 3,000 to 4,000 mark, where you get a little bit, and I mean a little bit, like not nearly enough to live on or anything, but it might pay a little way towards a night out. Once you pass the threshold, anyway, the sort of $50 threshold that they had back then, I'm not sure if that's still a thing, but you had to make $50 before you actually then saw that money.
And I'm assuming, for you with just generally what you do, that YouTube is kind of your central hub. But how does like your Facebook, your Twitters and things like that, how do you feed those in to try and direct traffic back to, your YouTube site?
Never exactly too much in a professional way. I've never been the best at social media. I try. I always make sure that I try and tweet my videos out or post them on Facebook sometimes. But and then just it's more likely there if someone wants to interact with me there, because I'm always at least checking my Facebook, my Twitter. If someone interacts with me there, then they're probably likelier to get an answer than they do on YouTube if they're just leaving a comment on one of my videos randomly. So they're more likely to actually get some interaction with me, because I do like to use it at least somewhat as a place for connecting with people.
Yeah, so more sort of like social chat and social element of, you're not just a faceless sort of voice, but you're actually interacting.
Yeah, I'm kind of better than that than, I don't know, doing all the stuff to be like a proper social media mogul, like tweeting out my videos 20 times a day or whatever. I couldn't do that. I have trouble enough doing it once.
So you've had some, really positive offshoots. Like, for instance, you mentioned Retro Magazine that you're doing some stuff for.
Okay, yeah.
Did that come directly from your videos and them reaching out to you, or how did that come about?
Yes, it did. It was kind of quite a happy thing when it happened. It was just not too long back. It was, I think, after Molyneux Part 1, maybe. The guy, the editor at Retro Gamer, a guy named Darren Jones, he reached out to me, essentially, and said, oh, hey, I'm a fan. How would you like to do something? And it just kind of went from there, and that's been, I've loved Retro Gamer so much. It's such a fantastic resource these days for all things retro. And again, because it's a British magazine, a lot of that is from the European British standpoint. So there's loads of Spectrum, Amiga and all that stuff. And it just kind of went from there. And it's like, wow, I'm writing for Retro Gamer now. I'm pretty fantastic. I kind of been gradually doing more and more stuff there. It was yesterday I did my first interview of a fairly legendary games dev that will hopefully be appearing in the magazine quite soon. And it's just kind of, that's really given me even more opportunities to sort of spread my work out and give me a bigger portfolio, I guess would be the professional way of doing it.
Feeding into that British European scene, I can't remember which video it is off the top of my head, but you make a really interesting, actually I think it's in your Sega one, maybe your Sega 95 one, it might be that one, but you make a really interesting observation, because obviously, I live in the US now, so I've now got an opinion of like what was going on over here, and growing up in that heyday of like 85 to around about 95 is when my main gaming period was. But you mentioned that the gaming crash of 1983 was an American thing, and I think you're absolutely spot on, but it was, I've never thought about it like that before. So I'd like, for the audience here, particularly for anybody that's outside of the UK, what that meant. It was a US thing, not a UK thing or European thing.
I think the thing with the gaming crash, it's kind of, it was a very staggered thing, actually, because I kind of looked at it from all angles, like both the American side and the British side. In the American side, I think what has kind of been a bit forgotten is that the first crash was in 1983, in America, that is, for consoles, for the 2600 and all that, they had it. Then the computer one didn't really happen until 1984. That lasted a bit longer. So it's kind of a long-term thing. It wasn't just like one day where, boom, everything just died. And again, yeah, going to obviously over here, the crash, it wasn't really a thing, no. it was, if anything, I mean, 1983 in particular for the UK was the period where there was lots of different computers out. It was kind of a boom period. It was the inverse of a crash. All these games, but in particular, all these computers. I mean, you had the Spectrum, the Micro, BBC Micro, Acorn Electron, the Commodore 64 was coming over from America then, and plus a lot of smaller ones like the Dragon and the Auric. I mean, what did happen in 1984 was that after kind of 83 being a boom period, and that was obviously when Clive Sinclair got his knighthood as well, because Margaret Thatcher saw him as the next face of British industry. Kind of proved to be a bit of an error on her part, but whatever. And in 1984, what happened was there was a contraction of the market. A lot of the lesser names in the computing world, names like Dragon from Wales and Auric, they folded. And so there was a little bit of a rough time, but it was never anything close to a crash. And obviously then kind of Sinclair started to struggle as well because of the QL and the C5 and other assorted terrible products. But then eventually kind of the market returned to stability. The good name survived. Amstrad came in as well. So, I mean, there was never a crash as such, but it was kind of a boom followed by a slight contraction, then normality. After 1984, until the arrival of the PC, computers, especially like microcomputers, was essentially a dirty word. I mean, people almost forget that the Amiga is an American machine because it was so big in Europe, Britain and Germany, but in America it was virtually nothing. As advanced as it was when the Amiga 1000 came out, it was very niche and always was.
And it's interesting as well because, I'm based out of Atlanta and there was a massive video scene here with the Amiga. And for me, it was the first thing I noticed when I moved over to the US in general. The small boxes weren't anything compared to what we had in the UK. And explaining it to people like, well, no, they were in the same sort of league as Nintendo and Sega. They just couldn't get their heads around it, which made my mind boggle.
I mean, it's only obviously C64 is the biggest one, I guess. And Apple II, I guess, as well, a little bit. In probably educational-wise, anyway. I mean, most computers, Len, in America, from my own research anyway, it was a business thing more than anything. Businesses had them. It wasn't so much like it became here, which is you need a computer in home. I mean, there was a bit of that, but it was stopped by the crash. Yeah.
I mean, it was PC also was just so dominant over here. That was another thing as well. It's that case of brand. It's kind of like if you look at it on the other end with Nintendo as well. Just Nintendo was just a massive thing here, and obviously, as you know well, they had licensing laws and things like that in place that they could just
dominate.
Keep everything. Yeah, absolutely. Which obviously is very different to what we experienced. So, in terms of your favorite games of all time, what are some of them?
Favourite games of all time, always the toughest one. I always put the nostalgia reasons, but I do still love playing it. I always put Final Fantasy VII up there. It was just mind-blowing to me at the time. Shadow 1 for the Mega Drive is definitely up there. Super Metroid and generic choice, but such a tight, beautifully designed game. Also kind of more modern stuff too that I really enjoy. Portal and Red Dead Redemption and Gone Home as well, kind of controversial choice, but just something that I really loved so much from a storytelling perspective. Phoenix Wright series, Streets of Rage 2, can't forget that one. Kind of goes all over the map in terms of what games are actually kind of my favourites. So I always find it quite hard to actually put a list together. Oh, and of course Metal Gear Solid. And if you could basically to the audience tell them what your favourite video that you've done has been, but also as well which ones that if you're going to go to your channel, which ones do you think people should check out? Obviously all of them, but which ones do you think in particular would really give a good feel of your channel? My favourite videos, it's a tough one. Generally the stuff that I'm doing now is the stuff that I'd say is most indicative of what I'm doing, when it's kind of the more documentary type stuff. I mean, if I had to just pick one, like just a single video, I would say Sega in 1995 actually is a really good one. I always thought I really did quite well with that video. I also really like the Mirrorsoft one. I really liked because it was very interesting, kind of the research they had to do in that a lot of the Mirrorsoft one wasn't about video games at all, weirdly enough. It was about Robert Maxwell, British tycoon and monster, is kind of doing all the research about this guy and kind of putting it in there and going through a proper rise and fall type video. Those two are certainly ones. Rise and fall of the Commodore Amiga and the Ocean Software one as well. Those would definitely be picks. And if you could give one piece of advice about YouTube, as kind of a communication channel, working with YouTubers, to follow your interests or to communicate certain things, what would that piece of advice be? Stick with it and make sure that you're having fun. Always ask yourself at every time time, am I having fun doing this? Because if you're not having fun doing YouTube, then you ain't going to be able to do it. I mean, no one ever got successful on YouTube unless they had a big muscle behind them, which a lot of them probably do these days, by just saying, oh, I want to make money off it. You've got to have fun, especially if it's just you doing it, because YouTube is quite a lonely job, especially when you're just starting out. It's just you doing everything. You're recording the videos, you're doing the narration, you're editing them, you're writing the script, and all this stuff for a lot of people anyway. So just make sure that you're having fun, and just practice. Just keep releasing stuff. The more you make videos, the better you get. I mean, it sounds obvious to say, but some people do expect it to just come immediately. Like, my first video will be brilliant, and that will be that. In all likelihood, your first video will be shit, but the more videos that you do, the better they will get. So you just gotta, it's all about perseverance.
Perseverance indeed. Now, I think one of the key takeaways from my podcast with Kim is this idea of, if you follow your interests, then good things can happen. I like this idea of, it's not just about following trends, it's about shaping trends. That can be the long-term value of things like social media, and in this case, video hosting sites like YouTube. I think this idea of, well, I'm not really that good at social media, but I can still get 19,000 subscribers on YouTube, is just a really cool thing. Because to me, in terms of Kim, her content really is that good. I think another side of it is the idea that an entity or a business like Retro Gamer Magazine would come to her and say, you know what, we're big fans, how'd you like to work together? That in itself is just the sign of you doing something good. And I can't speak highly enough of Kim, because just a very nice person, but also as well a very good videographer and a very good storyteller. I think that's the key thing to bring across here, that Kim Justice is a really good storyteller. I even found out what a PewDiePie was, but if you want to look that up, you look that up yourself. I've really enjoyed doing this one for you. I hope you'd enjoyed listening to it. As always, I will see you next time, or you can listen to me next time. But in the meantime, show some love on the social media, show some love on the links on the SoundCloud page, even subscribe to the SoundCloud page. Hello there, my name's Adam Spring, and I'm here to talk to you about a number of ways in which you can stay connected with and contribute to the Remotely Interested podcast. As I've said before, it's listener supported, and I love to include you guys as much as I can. Anyway, the big two are iTunes and SoundCloud, which you can subscribe to. Also for SoundCloud, you can follow, you can like, you can share, you can do a number of things with the content that I put up there. There's also Google Play, where you can check this podcast out, and there's also a Facebook page that you can like. Now, in terms of connecting with me directly, there's a Twitter handle, which is @thatinterested. You can also follow and reach out to me there. And there's also the Remotely Interested email as well, which is contact@remotely-interested.com. Anyway, I love doing this for you. I hope you enjoy it, and thanks for listening to the show.